Positive noises are coming out of the negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, with even an advisor to President Zelinski of Ukraine showing some optimism. What could that endpoint look like, and what more can the West do to strengthen Ukraine in the meantime? In this week's magazine, the historian Timothy Garton Ash makes 3 suggestions. He joins the show now. So, Timothy, thank you so much for joining Spectator TV. In the magazine this week, you write about what the West can do to help Ukraine, and you outline these 3 options. Can you give us a brief overview of them?
Absolutely. I mean, the question of questions, we've seen this heroic, extraordinary Ukrainian resistance. How can we help them? 3 big things, all of which come from President Zelinski in his tweets. Number 1, more weapons. Particularly air defense weapons and supplies to help them resist a siege, because that's what's now happening, an almost medieval siege of Ukrainian cities. Secondly, more sanctions, and the big one here is oil and gas. At the moment, Germans and Italians and others in the EU are still paying billions of euros effectively into Putin's war chest to pay their heating bills. And that would be a really major move, which would cost countries like Germany very dear economically. But as I argue, there's a moral cost to not doing it, right? And then the third big one, which Zelensky asks for, is accept Ukraine as a candidate for EU membership. And there I argue that the EU is not going to do that anytime soon. But there are lots of big things we, including Britain, can do to have a big reconstruction plan and to bring Ukraine gradually closer to a European future.
Can I pick you up on sanctions, first of all, which is that you say that is going to be expensive for the Germans. I think, yeah, it definitely will be. Do you think they're not going far enough now then? Because they have already said that they have already sanctioned some of these Russian companies, not to the extent that they're not importing the resources, but also that they've said that they'll reduce Russian gas by 2/3 by the end of the year. Is that not enough?
How many Ukrainians would have died by the end of the year? I think that's the answer to the question. Listen, because of the big mistakes we all made in not reducing energy dependence after the seizure of Crimea in 2014, they're in a bind, make no mistake. 30% of Germany's total primary energy supply comes from Russian oil, gas, and coal. It's enormous. If they make the stop, the estimated hit is between 1 and 3% of GDP, or 1,000 euros a head. So it's a big economic cost. But as I say, are you really going to go on paying Putin with every heating bill when Ukrainians are being massacred in the way they are?
But what is the realistic middle point? Because you can't just wean off overnight. So is it realistic for Germans or any Europeans to do that?
So interestingly, the big profit maker for Russia is oil. So one way to do this is actually to start by stopping oil imports and take a bit more time over gas. The good news is we're coming into the summer. You don't need so much energy in the summer. But you know what? The popular outrage in Germany is so immense, as it is in Britain, that I think this may yet happen.
And Timothy, on the military front, NATO has ruled out this no-fly zone, as Zelinski is asking for, citing concerns that Putin would use this as justification to attack NATO. But some people have argued that Putin clearly needs no justification for aggression, so it doesn't really matter almost. And if Zelensky's asking for it, maybe we should have that. What do you make of that argument?
Well, what I say is NATO is not going to do it. That's what's clear. And I mean, they've been already, Joe Biden has been absolutely clear about it. Jens Stoltenberg has been absolutely clear about it. So we could have a hypothetical discussion about what would happen if, and the answer is, Putin is capable of anything, but realistically, it's not going to happen. And so we have to do everything short of that mark. And actually, what I gather from the experts is that if we can get in sophisticated anti-aircraft air defense missiles, that's in a way as important as getting in those, Polish MiG planes, or a no-fly zone, which would be a no-fly zone only against the Russians.
And I want to talk to you about this Zelensky plan you're writing about. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm fed up with people keeping saying, we must have a new Marshall Plan because, there've been I can personally remember about 7 proposed Marshall Plans that never happened for former Yugoslavia, you name it, for East Central Europe. So I call it the Zelinski Plan. But listen, the war damage is already estimated at well over $100 billion. That's clearly an underestimated. The Russians are still pounding away. So it's hundreds of billions. And the least we in the West can do is to have a big reconstruction plan. And my argument is, by the way, that's also rebuilding the homes to which the millions of refugees in the rest of Europe will go home. So that's important for us too. But my argument is to connect it to some intermediate steps of connecting Ukraine more closely to Europe.
Well, it's a fascinating idea, and it's the sweetener, I guess, to those concessions that you alluded to. Can we talk about how this will end? Because it does seem like Zelensky may have to make some of these painful concessions.
So, as I say in the piece, I pray daily for a miracle on the Dnieper, like the miracle on the Vistula in 1920 when the Poles defeated the advancing Red Army and the Red Army simply retreated. But that would be a miracle. And barring miracles, neither side can win. And therefore they're going to have to fight their way, I'm afraid, through rivers of blood, sweat and tears, to a point where there's what Lawrence Friedman, the strategic thinker, calls a hurting stalemate, when both sides are hurting so much that they have to make a deal. And only the Ukrainians have the right to say what that deal is, can be. But we can at least start thinking about it. Now, Zelensky, yesterday, Tuesday, we're speaking on Wednesday, said, I don't think we're going to become a member of NATO. So he's already in effect saying, okay, we can go to neutrality. What's really painful is going to be the territorial concessions, Crimea and Donetsk and Luhansk, the provinces in the far east of the country. And that's really tough to take.
Well, I mean, let alone Zelensky, do you think the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian people would accept something like that?
So I talk regularly to people connected with the Ukrainian government. At the moment, the public position is no. But, and of course, we should in no way, shape or form be kind of forcing this on them, that we have absolutely no right to do that. But privately, they will acknowledge, these are facts on the ground. The comparison I draw with the so-called Winter War between Finland and the Soviet Union in 1939 to 1940, Stalin thought he'd roll over Finland as Putin thought he'd roll over Ukraine. In fact, the Finns put up the most magnificent, amazing military resistance, gave Stalin a bloody nose, and basically 6 months later they signed a peace. They had to give up about 1/10 of Finnish territory. Brutal concession. But Finland remained a free, sovereign, independent, democratic country. And I think every Finn you speak to would say that was a price worth paying.
Mm-hmm. And finally, Timothy, I just want to end on this note that you make about Zelensky. Obviously, his performance, I think, throughout all of this, I think many people can agree, has been exceeded expectations of an actor or comedian. You also mentioned his Twitter feed is a masterclass in 21st century war leadership. Well, tell us about that.
So every viewer should follow him on Twitter. It's absolutely amazing. By the way, when I started, he was just over 2 million followers. Now he's well over 5 million. In the middle of this war, in risk of his life, after every conversation with a Western leader, Biden or Scholz or Macron or Boris Johnson or whoever it is, he just does a tweet saying what they talked about and doing his main points. Then he does these video clips walking around besieged Kiev, his messages to the Ukrainian people and the Russian people. It is an absolute masterclass in political communication. And the effect is, the Ukrainians have already won the information war. The Russians are still fighting the military war, but the information war they've just won hands down. So it's like, imagine Winston Churchill with a Twitter account.
That's a great note to end on. Timothy Garton Ash, thank you very much for joining Spectator TV.